Okay, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Joe. He's Nick. I'm coming to you from our Think Radio Broadcast Center studio in Canada's national capital city, Ottawa. Nick is out on the farm looking after the animals and whatever else he looks after out there. And we've been talking about Remembrance Day. We've, in segment number 1 for this week's show, we just spent a good half hour sort of ranting about the U.S. presidential election, which I think was a lot of fun. Still not sure that we have all of the answers. And boy, we sure sympathize with our friends and listeners down there south of the border. But, you know, this is what happens. You guys should come up here and see how to run elections. We do run national elections pretty good here. So that's, you know, all you have to do is send us an email or give us a call. Check us out, right?
Yeah, just give us a call. We'll, you know, for the low price of $50 million, we'll set up your election system.
Anyway, so I promised that we'd get into a discussion here a little bit, talk a little bit about this new vaccine that Pfizer has announced that they have produced with a 90% plus effectiveness rate, which is actually pretty good. It hasn't been FDA approved yet, but I'm sure that it will be very soon. And this is the COVID-19 virus. So, the COVID-19 virus vaccine. So
right.
I would expect that you're going to have FDA approval. And the FDA, of course, is the federal, I think it's the Federal Drug Administration.
Federal Drug Administration.
I think that's what the initials stand for. That's in the United States. Of course, yep. In other countries, every other country has its own approval agency and standards, etc. So how widely distributed the vaccine gets into other countries and how quickly, that's a separate topic of discussion. I will say, Nick, that two things. First of all, Pfizer is the first out the gate, but other companies are probably on the verge of announcing that they've had very good, successful clinical trials as well for the vaccine that they're producing. So I would expect that that very quickly over the next month or so, we're going to hear from 1, 2, maybe 3 other companies. So we'll have a variety of different vaccinations out there available to the public. And I just want to say this, okay? Getting back, touching very, very slightly on the whole U.S. presidential election, etc. Look, you have to give credit where it's due, Nick. And I think that if Donald Trump is not the president of the United States when this virus hit, I think there's no way that we have a vaccine this quickly. I think the fact that they produced something so quickly, that the private sector and government mobilized as quickly as they did, as massively as they did. You know, they called it in the United States Operation Warp Speed. Maybe a little silly. Okay, I know some people snickered at that and they go, oh, that's so Donald Trump. But one thing you got to say about Donald Trump, whatever your feelings are about his style, the way he conducts himself, the way he does business, etc., okay, he gets things done. And this is something that he got done. And all of the credit, okay, and he's not going to say this, he won't accept it, I'm sure. He's going to say, well, it was this guy and this guy and this company and that. And all of that's true. There's lots of credit to go around. But the catalyst here, the unifying force behind this is Donald Trump. So, you know, you have to give him credit for this. Whatever happens in the election ultimately down south of the border.
I think you're right. I think it's one of these, like, a lot of people thought he was bombastic and he was full of himself and, you know, all the things that we've come to know and love about Donald Trump. If I was his personal aide, I would have dropped his cell phone through his shredder a long time ago. But that's just who he is. But I think you're quite right in the fact that It's whether or not you agree we need a vaccine. I personally am not convinced of that, because I think this whole thing is a tempest in a teapot, and it's just another element in that teapot. But if you needed a vaccine, he went out and made sure that it's there. And where I have a problem is when our government says, we're going to have 20 million doses by January or whatever it is. Look, logistically, I'm not sure that's possible because everybody on the planet wants this vaccine, except for me. I have no interest in it. But just from a general point of view, every country in the world is vying for this stuff. And Pfizer and the other companies can only produce it so quickly. And then you have the logistical nightmare of getting it out there. So how that plays out, I don't know. But you're quite right about Trump being the man who deserves the credit. He won't get it. The media will never, they would rather chew rusty nails and razor blades than admit Donald Trump did anything right. Certainly not getting a vaccine out the door as quickly as this has been done. So I agree with you in that sense that he's going to, he is the one responsible for it, and if nobody else but us gives him credit for it, at least we're doing it.
Now, you've touched on something I think really fascinating, Nick, and that is that you say that you probably won't take the vaccine or get vaccinated once it hits the open market, which opens the door to a whole other area of debate, and that is whether or not the government is going to make this a mandatory vaccine. Now, I don't think that there's any reason, my personal opinion at this stage, I don't see the reason why we should make this vaccination mandatory. And I'm not sure that I see the need for lots of vaccinations to be mandatory. I'm not saying in principle that we shouldn't have mandatory vaccinations. I'm open-minded about it. But do we need to have one here? I'm not sure. But given the degree of what's the word I'm looking for? Hoopla, if you will, the panic that has been cultivated carefully, I think, by the governments, by various governments, in response to COVID-19. And I think that panic is the right word to use, then I think that it's ultimately, there's no question that once this vaccine becomes widely available, that the government is going to find some way of telling people, you must have it. You must take this vaccination to prevent the spread of this particular disease, this particular illness. What's your view on that?
I think if first of all, saying it's mandatory is one thing, enforcing it is another.
A good point.
You can pass all the laws you want, but if they cannot be enforced, then it doesn't matter what the government says. It's like the speed limit on the highway might be 60 miles an hour, but everybody drives 70, 75. Well, then the speed limit is effectively 75, not 60, even though it's posted at 60. So unless you're willing to commit the resources to have 400 OPP officers lining the 401 from Cornwall all the way down to Windsor and ticketing anybody who goes anything over 60, kind of like they do in the state of Ohio, then it's unenforceable. You cannot. There's plenty of examples out there. People say, "Oh yeah, well I got a ticket." Yeah, but how fast were you going when you got it? You weren't doing 65, were you? So they cannot impose on something.
Yeah, with the speed limit, it's almost spot enforcement. There's no universal enforcement. It may be against the law of speed, but you have to be caught they can't enforce it universally.
Right.
You're right.
So, but how do we do that with something like a vaccine?
Well, that's my question: what does a mandatory vaccination program look like? How do you enforce it?
Well, you would have to, from the government's point of view, everyone would go to their local health clinic. They line up, roll up their sleeve, and take a shot.
Okay, so what
That's
happens
how
if
it's supposed to work?
so what happens if Nick Vandergraat just says thanks but no thanks? What then?
Well, now they've got a problem because I won't be the only one. I'm not speaking for anybody else but myself, but I know full well that in a country with 36 million people, I'm not the only one who isn't interested in this vaccine. I am not anti-vaccine, by the way.
Right.
I think there's some very effective and useful vaccines.
Right. So you and I are pretty much on the same page with respect to that. We're not anti-vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, who would argue against a vaccine against, let's say, German measles or some other dread disease, polio, tuberculosis, those kind of things? Absolutely, because they pose such a massive threat to health. I am not convinced at all that this particular illness is that level of threat that requires a mandatory vaccine. And you do have, as a private individual, a right to make stupid choices.
Right.
And if other people look at my choices and say, well, that was really stupid, I shrug and say, from your perspective, it might be, but not from mine, because we supposed to live in a free and open society. So if I don't want to take something the government's offering, it's up to me, to accept or reject it. And if the government doesn't like it, well, bully for you. You're not, I don't care.
Okay, so
and there's going to be.
So here's my question. Here's my question, Nick. What would be your objection? On what basis do you object? In other words, I understand that you're saying you don't think that this pandemic is as serious as it's been portrayed. Okay, you don't think that the danger is as great as the government has suggested that it is. So
that's right.
So for you, you don't see the point in having a vaccination. So you're not going to have it.
Vaccinated against. Yeah.
Okay.
It's an extension of my "this is ridiculous." The government's not taking it seriously, so why should we mentality?
Okay, so that's
They let millions of people into this country via commercial air since March, and there's been no screening, no testing. There may be some now, but certainly for a long time there wasn't. And people were getting on airplanes flying all over the country, and yet we couldn't go at Easter to celebrate with our family and friends. We couldn't, they wanted us to stay home and do staycations and things like that. They were telling us on one hand how to behave, and yet on the other they were letting other people behave completely any way they wanted to. And that to me is not taking it seriously. And if they're not going to take it seriously, neither am I.
So then my question is, well, maybe you're answering the question because I was going to say this. I understand the position you're taking. My question would be, okay, why not take it? Why not have the vaccine anyway? Would you be concerned that it would be harmful?
Nope. No. That's not my concern. I just don't want to play the game.
Okay, so
I'm not interested in getting involved in this program in any way, fashion. If I have to put a mask on for my job, okay, I sign up with a company to do a particular task, and they tell me, when you are performing this function, you must wear a mask, and I sign anyway, then I have to wear a mask because that's what I've agreed to.
Okay, so what if
the government just... Go ahead.
What if they came back to you, an employer came back to you and said, if you want to work here, you have to have this vaccine?
Well, that hasn't happened, but this is a hypothetical.
Of course.
If it did happen, I would ask for an exemption, or I would say why and want an explanation and say, well, the government's going to shut us down if we don't, which would put me out of work and simply, have a negative impact on my family's lifestyle. I would probably suck it up and do it anyway, even though in my private life and my time away from work, I won't wear one. Now, you got to pick your battles, in other words.
Of course. Now, I just noticed that AJ made a comment about it's a vaccine today. Tomorrow, you're not allowed to